Hello and welcome. For weeks, Washington and Tehran have exchanged threats, military strikes and warnings of further escalation. Tonight, however, the picture is becoming even more fluid. US President Donald Trump says that US-Iran deal documents are in near final form, with a possible signing that could take place as early as this weekend in Europe. He also suggests that the Strait of Hormuz could reopen as soon as a deal is signed, signaling a potential easing of one of the world's most sensitive maritime flashpoints. However, Iran's foreign ministry is pushing back, stressing that the agreement with Washington is not yet final, underscoring that key gaps still remain despite the accelerating diplomatic signals. President Trump has also announced the cancellation of planned military strikes, framing the moment as a possible diplomatic opening. On the Iranian side, officials say they remain open to dialogue but insist they will not compromise on core principles or sovereignty. So, is the region moving away from confrontation or simply entering a new phase of it? So, we will discuss all this and more just after the jingle. Welcome back to our special coverage, and to help me have more insights and discuss all these latest developments, I'm joined tonight with two distinguished guests. Joining me from Scotland, Dr. Yvonne Ridley. She's leader of Scotland's Workers' Party, former journalist and author. She will join us later on from Glasgow. I'm also joined by Mr. Arski Dawood, his principal analyst at MAA Risk LLC. Thank you, Mr. Arski, for being with us again.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you so much. So we will start with you with this question, Mr. Arski. President Trump says discussions with Tehran have reached advanced stages. He also cancelled plans or planned military strikes. Yet Iranian officials continue to insist that they have not altered their negotiating positions on key issues. When you look at these developments together, do you see genuine momentum toward de-escalation, or just simply a pause with both sides reassess their next move?
Frankly, I think it's all of the above, right? I think on the one hand, there is genuine interest to find an exit out of this mess. Both the Americans and the Iranians need to conclude this saga. The sooner the better, right? So they've been talking for a while. They talk every day. The pace of those talks is unclear because obviously we know that the Iranians, we are hearing that they're talking using, hand notes, written notes. So it takes a while for the process to come to fruition. There's a lot to talk about, for sure. So talks have been taking place. The question is, at the same time, there's a lot of things that we hear from the press, from publications like Axios, from American publications, from Donald Trump himself, that are meant for a domestic audience, particularly around economic issues. If you notice these optimistic outlooks and the idea that the decision is coming next happened at a time when economic data show weakness, when markets are reacting negatively. And so those proclamations come as a way to sort of ease tension. And you see immediately after a Truth Social comes out of Donald Trump, the market tends to, feel better, and including oil prices for sure. So it's ambiguous. There is an ongoing discussion, there's an ongoing negotiation. We're not going to expect them to come very quickly. It takes a while. But at the same time, of course, there are tactical messaging that takes place, particularly, as I said, targeted towards the market.
Yes. Just yesterday, the US struck Iran, and after weeks of military escalation and growing fears of a broader regional conflict, Washington now is going back to diplomacy, while Tehran continues to emphasize deterrence and readiness to answer and defend itself. From a geopolitical risk perspective, how fragile is this momentum?
Well, it's fragile, but remember, both countries, and particularly the US, there's a deadline looming, and the deadline is around the upcoming elections. Israel has its own elections coming up, I think, in October. Iran's economy is in tatters. There's a lot of trouble there. So, as we said in the past, Iran has the longevity on its side. It can certainly wait through the process to get better concessions. The U.S., it's a lot less than that because, as you know, elections are coming up. But more importantly, the summer season is coming, and the summer season is coming with prices expected to skyrocket if the issue continues. So there is this need to de-escalate and to find a compromise. The problem that I see, Yassine, is there are too many interests surrounding the decision makers both in Tehran and in Washington. There are certainly the lobby groups, there are the Israelis. I can imagine how the Gulf monarchies are very nervous about what's coming next. Mm-hmm. What do you make of Iran becoming a regional superpower or a regional power broker? That's something that they've always didn't want to have. And so they're definitely, we always think in terms of the US talking to Iran when there is a huge ecosystem of players, economic, political, geopolitical, that have a stake in what's coming next. And what's coming next could be extraordinary.
Yes, and there is maybe a lot of incoherence in this, since we had reports that the Zionist entity said it's not involved in this plan or this agreement of the ceasefire between the US and Iran. Why Iran stresses that always and repeats and reiterates that the agreement involves the whole Middle East region, including the Lebanon and Gaza fronts. So what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think this, in my mind, is probably only one thing that everybody seems to agree, almost everybody seems to agree, is that Iran should not have nuclear power or nuclear weapons. And I think Iran has always made it clear, at least in the previous regime under Ayatollah Khamenei, that they just don't want that. So I think there is a consensus, at least in a way that Trump messages what's coming. In fact, if you heard his statements today, is we're gonna have a deal. The deal is coming up. It's going to be signed somewhere. I think they said in Europe. J.D. Vance is going to go there, and so here's the victory quote where Iran won't have nuclear weapons. So we know that's, but everything else, nothing else has been the subject of any final clear agreement. Mm-hmm. The control of Hormuz, the fate of Lebanon, southern Lebanon, and Gaza. To your point, all of these were tied by the Iranians as part of a grand deal, a final deal. Without that, it makes no sense. And we know Israel has plans for southern Lebanon, just the way it has plans for Gaza. So where do you sit? And that's where you see all these various pressure points building on Donald Trump, who may have been the author of the, writing about how to make deals. This is a different level for sure.
Yes. So, and maybe one of the striking features of this crisis is that diplomacy and military pressure are unfolding at the same time, simultaneously. We've seen yesterday the strikes, we've seen again today the call to go back to diplomacy, to sign an agreement. Does that create leverage for negotiations, or does it make agreement harder to reach when we see these kind of shifts?
Now, those skirmishes are absolutely something you should expect. It's one way for the two feuding parties to signal to the other one, well, I have the power. Can you imagine, one hitting and the other one not responding, right? So this tit for tat is definitely something that you should expect. What I found, Yassine, is that it hasn't escalated to a place where it's a full-blown, offensive or wars, if you will. It's in a grand scheme of things, it's essentially skirmishes that meant to position the other one. One hits, the other one says, you know what, hey, I'm here too. I'm going to do it. So I would not read too much, as long as, of course, the talks continue. And both of them are signaling, by the way, that they're talking. And that's a good thing. How long this is going to last, as I said, it's a matter of time, really.
Yes, yeah, indeed. And also we have Iranian officials who continue to stress that they remain committed to their red lines despite renewed diplomatic signals from Washington. Do we know exactly what are Tehran's red lines, and is Tehran strengthening its negotiating position, maybe, or highlighting deep disagreement with Washington?
I think the red lines have already been stated by them. I think getting their money back, is something they want for sure. Including southern Lebanon and Gaza as part of the discussions is something that's part of their red line. And that's what I'm saying. We really don't know what those terms are that Trump has presumably accepted, right? We don't know those terms, because if the terms that Trump accepted are the Iranian terms, then we're going to see some big geopolitical moves in the region, and globally as well, because we're talking about a country that is eager and interested in controlling 25-30% of raw materials, LNG, gas, petroleum products that go into the American industrial and economic world, helium, things that feed into the AI and the data center growth, very much at the heart of this. I think it's fair to assume that Iran won't have all of this. It's too big for anybody to let one country control a waterway. But clearly it's part of their bargaining power, right? They've shown that you don't have to have the biggest navy in the world. You don't have to have the biggest air force in the world to have an impact on a global economy. And they know their position and their posture. What are they willing to give in exchange for a return to some normalcy would be the billion-dollar question. But I think this idea of controlling Hormuz and charging a toll, it's going to be difficult. Yes. And that's why we need to appreciate the kind of trouble this war has created.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Dawood. And here I would like to welcome Dr. Yvonne Ridley. She's leader of Scotland's Workers' Party, former journalist and author, joining us live from Glasgow. Thank you so much, Dr. Yvonne Ridley, for accepting our invite.
Yes, you're welcome.
Thank you. Dr. Yvonne, even as diplomacy remains part of the conversation, military deterrence continues to shape the calculations of both Washington and Tehran, as we have seen yesterday. Iran's military leadership says its forces remain at the highest level of readiness and warns any aggression would trigger a decisive response. How should we interpret those statements? Defensive, signaling, or diplomatic pressure?
Well, we're definitely in uncharted waters. I think the term that we're looking for to describe what is happening is coercive diplomacy, which is basically the official term for what you are seeing right now. A deliberate strategy of using intense military violence to force an adversary into signing a peace deal. Of course, what you have on the left is America, and the adversary is Iran. And in terms of intellect, I've said this before, it's like watching a child playing tiddlywinks, that's the Americans, against a grandmaster who's playing three-dimensional chess. Instead of waiting for the talks to play out, the Trump administration is using a bomb your way to peace playbook, which, as I say, is unprecedented. They alternate between launching devastating military attacks to maximize leverage and then immediately offer a pen to sign a peace treaty. The mechanics of this volatile dynamic reveal exactly what is driving the chaos. The escalate to de-escalate strategy is something which I don't think any of us have seen before. It is peculiar to the Donald Trump administration. First of all, there's a spark, then there's a fragile ceasefire, then there's a pause in the war. This went on right throughout April. Then negotiations over Iran's nuclear program were stalled. And when Iran shot down a US helicopter over the Strait of Hormuz, Washington used this as a reason to launch massive waves of self-defense airstrikes. Now we're seeing the leverage, which is the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth bluntly summarizing his strategy, saying, if we need to negotiate with bombs, we'll negotiate with bombs. Well, what sort of strategy is that? The US paired these strikes with crippling economic threats, including a vow by Trump to permanently seize control of Iran's vital oil infrastructure at Karg Island. So the desired outcome, by inflicting this sudden hot and cold severe military and economic pain, America is attempting to compress Tehran's bargaining position and force them to capitulate to strict terms. It isn't going to happen.
Yes.
I think that Iran has already shown.
Yes, and
that,
Dr. Ridley here.
Yes,
Dr. Ridley here, President Trump says there is a basis for what you are saying, for an agreement with a possible signing this weekend in Europe, while Iran insists it remains committed to diplomacy without changing its core positions, even though we've seen that Washington is trying, as you said, to exercise pressure on Tehran using military actions. Do you believe this as a meaningful, or this can lead to a meaningful agreement? Do you believe it's still achievable?
No, I don't. I mean, what we're seeing are two sides trapped in brinkmanship. Coercive diplomacy is volatile, it's highly unstable, because both Washington and Tehran are trying to deploy the exact same tactics at the same time. And this creates a sort of trap which the US is falling into. 1 minute the US is demanding that Iran completely halts independent uranium enrichment. And let's bear in mind, last year, Donald Trump was boasting how he had finished the uranium enrichment plans for Iran, and he said they bombed these sites and they would not recover for many years. And now he's saying we've got to halt this uranium enrichment. Well, Donald, I thought you did that last year. You know, he is so inconsistent, and he's just all over the place. The one thing that we do know for sure is that Israel does not want a peace deal, and this could explain the sort of schizophrenic approach the Americans are having. In the meantime, there's pushback from the Iranians because they do not want to look weak or surrendering unconditionally, and so Iran has retaliated by firing missiles, not at Kuwait and Bahrain. It is threatening of firing the missiles at US bases in Kuwait and Bahrain. And bizarrely, the people of Bahrain and Kuwait, the citizens, aren't being told that this is the reason why they're being targeted. And the message that Iran is trying to get through is, if you host a US military base, you are putting a target on your back.
Exactly, since it's hit maybe from these very military bases, Iran is being hit. And also the consequences, Dr. Ridley, of this crisis extend far beyond Washington and Tehran. We've seen the global markets, the economy, the Strait of Hormuz, which has once again become central to these discussions, especially with new signals that it could reopen as soon as a deal is signed. If tensions around the Strait of Hormuz intensify again, what would be the immediate impact on global markets, Dr. Yvonne?
Well, ordinary people around the world, regardless of whether they're from the global south or from the west, will suffer because it is impacting food prices. So the very basics of life are being affected by this. Just today I was speaking to somebody who's got a real dilemma because he needs to fill up his oil tank at his home to get heating, but he's in the process of selling his home, and the minimum of oil that he can get is 500 litres, which is over £1,000, and he doesn't want to go to that expense. You know, these are everyday situations that ordinary working class people are facing. And as for going to the shop to buy bread, it's no longer an easy trip to make. And the only success story in the retail market at the moment are the charity food banks that are operating in the UK, you know, one of the richest countries in the Western world, and people are having to go to food banks because they cannot put bread on the table.
And this is all because of the crisis in one region of the world, which is in the Middle East, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
It's a catastrophic all-out situation which could lead to a regional war.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Yvonne. Now I go back with this question. I direct it to you, Mr. Dawood. Here, are we witnessing the beginning of a diplomatic breakthrough? We have seen today that both sides started again to open their diplomatic channels for negotiations, or simply a pause before another confrontation? And maybe what are you watching most closely in the days ahead?
I think until we have something on paper and signed, sealed, and delivered, we don't have anything, right? The question mark is really what's the attitude or the response of the Iranians. I'll be curious to know who are the negotiators on the Iranian side. I have to believe that there are several groups and lobby groups within Iran that are part of an ongoing discussion. But I think we're going to continue to see this status quo where the U.S. government, particularly Donald Trump, signal that he's going to bump today, tomorrow. When the markets go haywire, he comes back and says, well, no, we're reaching a deal. And the Iranians come along and say, no, we haven't. So I think we're going to see that for a little while, at least until summer, probably. My guess would be summer, unless there's something really happening now. But to Dr. Ridley's point, what's going on is pretty drastic on the economic side. And we haven't seen it yet fully in the U.S. yet, the way the doctor explained, specific to, I think, the UK. The World Bank just came up with its new forecast for GDP 2026, and they dropped it down to 2.5%. Just to give you an idea of what 2.5% means, it's 2020, the peak of COVID. That is how drastic it is. And they warned that unless there is a breakthrough, to your question, unless there is a breakthrough soon enough, that forecast has to be halved. Probably around 1.5%. And that is famine, that is crop collapse, that is food shortages, that is social unrest. We've seen that already in Kenya. We've seen that in Bolivia. We're seeing people in the South, in the global South, struggling, not just the North, not in the UK, but certainly a lot of people are struggling. So breakthrough, hopefully, but not until it's on paper.
Yes, we all hope the same. Thank you so much. We've reached the end of our special coverage program. Thank you so much, Mr. Arsqi Dawood, for all your insights and contribution.
Pleasure, thank you.
And also thank you, Dr. Yvonne Ridley, for all your insights and contribution in this special coverage program. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Of course, the situation between Washington and Tehran remains highly fluid, with diplomacy and deterrence unfolding side by side, and with new signals suggesting a possible breakthrough window in the days ahead. Whether this leads to a signed agreement or renewed tensions will be closely watched across the region and the world. I'm Yassine Rikti signing off. Thank you for your kind attention. See you tomorrow.